Violence, which is always one of the more interesting parts of this book. Um, do we live in a violent society? Obviously. When we've seen an evolution of war since the 1500s, um, the Cold War nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union has kind of enhanced that and brought us to where we're at today. We're actually probably in one of the more peaceful eras of human history, believe it or not. We go look through traditionalization of warfare. Let's go ahead and skip up to World War II, as some of these things are a little bit more maybe interesting, so to speak. When we talk about history of warfare, industrialization is caused in probably a technological advancement has really created ways that wars are fought now. Uh, Planes bomb cities, an offensive war. Um, but if we go and kind of look at the Cold War, a lot of the Cold War was fought on rhetoric. Warsaw Pact countries, which is a lot of those Eastern European countries, versus NATO countries, which are mostly our allies or Western Europe. Um, Nuclear arms race, which really played a role into it even now today when we are monitoring um, nuclear um, productions, which led to something called the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where for a few days the United States and the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and they were just waiting to see who blinked first. Obviously, diplomacy was able to work its way through that. Um, the Cold War also exacerbated lower level conflicts where we had proxy wars. Proxy wars are going to be a situation where you have somebody fighting for you, right? We had proxy wars in Greece, Cuba, and Nicaragua. We supported a side. That other side, using money and technology and weapons that we provided, would fight in place of U.S. soldiers, right? Now, when we talk about powers and great powers today, whether it's China, the U.S., um, it's really irrational for us to fight each other directly because we have capacities to fight each other different ways. Um, we have a lot to lose, also. Superpowers directly fought against the others. Proxies, Korea, Vietnam, the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan. And also I saw the concept of something called guerrilla warfare, which is the kind of the the way, the unconventional form of fighting. I was a big Star Wars fan, so if you've seen Rogue One, the attack during the middle of the movie um, was in a sense guerrilla warfare. The Ewoks attacking the Imperial troops is another form, just to trying to make it really, really basic. When we talk about the Cold War, um, the Core War ended when the Berlin Wall came down. Um, World War III was really never a real issue, and it still will probably never be something that happens here. Um, we're all allied with countries that are wealthy. Some of the threats, other than China, might include Russia, Brazil, and India. And I always like to say, war with China is going to be unlikely because we depend on each other. We depend on China for cheap labor. China holds a lot of our debt. We talked about that. Here's a graph of national powers, and a little bit more about the Cold War, um, and how that evolved into more conflicts throughout the world, where we see threats to our economic or security interests. The first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, both led to quick victories, but building a stable democracy still was harder. If we look at what came out of the second Gulf War, continued religious and ethnic tensions, and the emergence of ISIS or ISIL. Now we talk about terrorism. Terrorism, we definitely live in an age of terror. And what is terrorism? The risk is relatively low to be hurt in a terrorist attack, but it's still something we should be mindful of. Um, It's something that's used prominently by radical Islamic fundamentalists. Now, I kind of want to deviate a little bit from and not totally agree with what the author of the text is saying in this, because there's a lot of domestic terrorism that happens as well. Now, is some of it spurned by Islamic fundamentalism? Yeah, true. That's true. But is every terrorist a radical Islamic fundamentalist? Definitely not. A picture of 9/11. You know, what was the intention of terrorism? Or maybe to drive out a colonial occupier, targeting police, military, public buildings, airplane hijackings, which started probably in the late 70s, early 80s. And terrorism in general was rare outside of specific areas such as North Ireland, and how Northern Ireland still has a very real conflict with Ireland. Now we talk about the people responsible for 9/11. Most of these people were in the country on expired visas, so in a sense, immigration law kind of failed at that point. Um, and when we talk about 9/11 definitely opened the age of terror. Whether we've seen the attacks in London, Spain, all over Europe, the Ariana Grande concert. So, and both Obama and Bush felt that these attacks hurt American values. And here's a list of some of the worst terror attacks on U.S. soil. Obviously, we're not going to have. I don't believe the San Bernardino shooting is on this list. The Fort Hood shooting is, and neither is the Pulse nightclub shooting. Um, um, and the Pulse nightclub shooting is a little. I mean, really, I don't know. It's kind of a was this guy Omar Mateen really tied to ISIS, or was he just someone who was just had a couple of mental disorders that needed to be addressed and were never done so, or was he really being backed by ISIS? Who knows? But we're not going to find these on here because they happened after the book was published. Now, when we talk about the invasion of Afghanistan and the war on terror, overthrowing the Taliban was relatively easy, right? But over time, the Taliban has retaken territories in that area, and we've kind of seen a movement from the traditional warfare, where the boots on the ground. While we still have that, a lot of it is searching for hostiles and the use of drones. Borders and sovereignty blur. Al Qaeda not actually Afghan, but the Afghan government did provide safe haven. The Taliban extends into Pakistan, and Osama bin Laden was killed in a Pakistan raid in 2011. Um, a lot of these Al Qaeda and Taliban uh, members are kept at Guantanamo Bay, so they're not subject to Geneva Convention protections, and they are not covered under the Constitution because they're considered enemy combatants. Some of our response that affect on home life was the passage of the Patriot Act, which kind of took away some of our civil liberties with regards to surveillance here in the U.S. NSA surveillance programs, heightened security at airports, whether it's TSA or maybe something as simple as not being able to go greet the person flying in at the gate like we used to be able to. Now you have to stay past security, and you can only go past security if you have a boarding pass. And we saw the institution of the Department of Homeland Security, which kind of consolidated ICE. I mean, what started ICE, which was a consolidation of Custom Border Protections and the Border Patrol. And just, some figures on monies. And what is the root of violence? Are we naturally inclined to be violent? Do we have a cultural kind of attraction to violence? Does our political institutions kind of promulgate violence? And does our material landscape compel us to turn to force? Some people might believe in the hardwiring attribution bias to the fact that are people inherently bad, right? That's an interesting question that we need to take on. Okay, so let's go ahead and end this here. Take a look at some of these explanations from the theoretical point of view. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'm also going to post a small uh, slide set show about some of the domestic terrorism incidents that we've had here in the U.S. And when we talk about just wars, one of the important things is, when do we need to fight? I mean, it might be a subjective term, and at what legal and moral limits should prevent us from fighting, but when do we fight, right? And I think there's going to be a different answer for different people, all right? So think about that. When is a war just? Okay, so that's what I got. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.